to welcome you at this seminar this morning that SAIA is co-arranging with the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD. Indeed, thank you very much, Pamela, for making this possible today. We hope that this will be the first of a series of roundtables on the African Continental Free Trade area. I think there's broad agreement that the AFCFTA holds enormous potential for our region. It represents the largest regional bloc, and we've seen amazing political momentum around the call by African leaders to sign up to the AFCFTA, and also very, very rapid, and I think perhaps for external observers, surprising momentum around the negotiations process and the rapid way in which it has progressed. But there's of course a very big difference between signing up to the AFCFTA and ensuring its formal implementation. And that is actually what we are going to try and unpack a little bit during this discussion today with key experts from all across the region. I think the AFCFTA from its the AFCFTA Secretariat and state parties have tried to facilitate the start of trade under the agreement through the guided initiative, and I think that's one of the most important recent steps that we've seen. We've also seen in the SACU context that the tariff offer, the ACFTA tariff offer, has been approved by the ACFTA Secretariat, and that raises really interesting questions about whether we're now seriously seeing the beginning of movement towards the development of regional value chains. I'm going to hand over to Pamela from AUDA NEPAD to make her opening remarks. I hope that we will have a very, very robust discussion today. We're looking for your input and comments. I think there are many challenges that we're facing in the region, particularly in the context of the broader geopolitical context. But that's actually that should actually spur us to a much greater ambition in terms of the implementation of the AFCFTA. So with those few words, I'm going to hand over to Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And good morning to you all. And thank you again for attending both in person and online. Your presence certainly shows your interest on this important topic of, reflections on the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, its challenges, and the way forward. My name, again, as mentioned, is Pamela Gopal, and I represent the Economic Analysis and Foresight Unit at the African Union Development Agency. I particularly lead on a program called the Policy Bridge Tank, and it aims to capitalize actually the valuable work that the African think tanks are doing, both in the continent and even global think tanks. So today we have partnered with SAIA to provide a non-political platform for exchanging ideas on development issues and related to the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So on behalf of our Chief Executive Officer, Mrs. Nados Bekele Thomas, who regrets, unfortunately, that she couldn't be with us today due to unforeseen circumstances, I welcome you to this insightful policy dialogue, and a special welcome to our expert panelists who will provide us with the new knowledge and recommendations for the successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. To achieve sustainable development, the African Union Development Agency and SAIA understands that we cannot act alone. This dialogue facilitates our united objectives towards Africa's development, and the Development Agency has the key responsibility to monitor and evaluate Agenda 63. So we need to reflect and demonstrate the acquired knowledge for our leadership support, partners, and African ownership. We are aware that regional and national content from African think tanks is diverse, but often inaccessible to our policymakers. And our work with think tanks is essential as their expertise lies in generating knowledge to influence policy development and review. And the Policy Bridge Tank ensures that evidence-based knowledge is disseminated to policymakers towards the realization of policy into practice. So we focus on evidence utilization through interactive consultations like the one we are having today, in providing mechanisms to operationalize and monitor key objectives with a focus on building our own African knowledge. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a flagship project of the Agenda 2063, and it certainly has the potential to transform Africa into a global powerhouse. So with these few words, I wish you all successful deliberations today and welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. It's now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Mustafa Sarkar, who heads the Trade and Market Unit at the Auda NEPAD agency. He has over 20 years of experience in multilateral economic diplomacy, and including several field missions across Africa and at the African Union. He also holds a PhD in international economics from the University of Pretoria. So we very much see you as an honorary South African. It's lovely to have you here. And Dr. Sarkar will reflect this morning on the journey of the AFCFTA since its inception, and broad question, where are we? Thank you very much. Handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noma, for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen who participating either in person or online, all you protocols observed, good morning. Allow me at the beginning of my intervention once again to express the sincere apology of Her Excellency Madam CEO of Auda NEPAD, who didn't manage to be with us this morning due to unforeseen circumstances. Also take this opportunity to extend our deep appreciation on behalf of Auda NEPAD to the South African Institute of International Affairs, SAIA, and all stakeholders for their myriad efforts to successfully organize our roundtable in collaboration with Auda NEPAD this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we may agree that the theme of our roundtable today clearly reflects the firm commitment of the wider relevant stakeholders at all levels to unlock the untapped opportunities spurred by the ACFTA, which is perceived as a game changer to propel development in Africa, GDP growth, job opportunities, particularly for youth and women, and improving its resilience against future crises and shocks, as stipulated in Agenda 2063 and the UN Agenda 2030 as well. For instance, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, expects around 30% increase in intra-African trade due to the implementation of the ACFTA compared to Africa without the agreement scenario. In addition to the trade impact, the World Bank alludes that the ACFTA's successful implementation can lift around 15 million African people out of the extreme poverty cycle by 2035. Ladies and gentlemen, despite its enormous potential opportunities, the economic integration agenda and intra-African trade at all levels have been vigorously challenged by incumbent raw material-oriented production structures and low productivity, along with low competitiveness, which have long been a stumbling block for attaining the envisaged economic integration on the continent. These impediments have been further exacerbated by the lack of quality infrastructure for trade and inadequate development of human capital needed by the African countries to position themselves to compete with others in the global value chains. Moreover, uneven distribution of costs and benefits expected by the ACFTA is perceived also one of the key obstacles that the continent should address to leverage its potential impact on the development process in Africa. For these reasons, we may agree that the ACFTA's spurred potentials will not happen on their own and can't be realized overnight. But instead, the successful implementation of our ambitious ACFTA project requires all relevant stakeholders at all levels to commit bold actions to strengthen Africa's resilience through improved local manufacturing and production, supply chains, a more robust private sector engagement, particularly micro, small, and medium enterprises, accounting for around 90% of economic activities around the continent, and along with increased regional markets and trade. Moreover, it's pertinent to urge all African countries to look beyond their own immediate priorities and focus on the possibilities of an integrated market created by the agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, cognizant of its mandate as a Union African Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD prioritizes the following areas of intervention, including, first of all, through AUDA-NEPAD-led Energize Africa initiatives. The agency encourages massive investment in human capital, skills for jobs, equal opportunities in education, health, and training that can make the most significant differences in the African countries' ability to grow sustainably over the long term and become economically competitive, along supporting the humanitarian development peace nexus with a particular focus on women and youth. Second, promote inclusive and environmentally friendly industrialization, including agro-processing, manufacturing, particularly pharmaceutical products, and minerals developments. Besides, we at AUDA-NEPAD also work to advance alternative industrialization pathways, including blue economy industries and tradable services such as tourism and ICT, which have gained increasing momentum in Africa. Third, our integrated corridor approach supports the investment in developing adequate hard and soft infrastructure, including standards and conformity, integrated multimodal transport and trade corridors, information and energy as well. This is aligned with unlocking trade facilitation, logistics, and coordinated border management to unlock the untapped opportunities triggered by implementing ACFTA, along with leveraging disaster risk preparedness and resilience in the face of the recurrent shocks and threats. Last but not least, given its ability to catalyze sustainable economic development and job creation, AUDA-NEPAD advocates for promoting special economic zones and cross-border value supply chains, focusing on leveraging micro, small, and medium enterprises through plenty of initiatives such as Homegrown Solutions Accelerator, the African Kaizen Initiative, along with 100 million SMEs initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we at AUDA-NEPAD, we are confident that our deliberations today will succeed in underlining the key challenges inhibiting the full implementation of the ACFTA to achieve the legitimate aspirations of our African people as stipulated in Agenda 2063 along with UN Agenda 2030. To this end, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate our full commitment and willingness to work together with all relevant stakeholders to leverage Africa's myriad efforts, talents, and resources in driving an accelerated economic integration process for an equitable, sustainable, and resilient future of our people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sakir. We haven't allocated, but I don't know if you are willing to perhaps take a couple of questions or comments from our audience.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Okay. I mean, I think I'd like to open the floor, and if you do have any comments or questions that you'd like to pose, perhaps also from our online audience. Perhaps I can just kickstart the process a little bit. I think the points that you've raised around, particularly the embeddedness of commodities in Africa's trade profile, I think that is certainly one of the biggest advantages of our region, but certainly it's also a massive challenge, because it does slant our trade relationships in a very, very particular way. It also, I mean, raises questions around how we can better trade with each other. Perhaps just from your perspective, I mean, I thought it was very, very important, the point that you raised around the integrated corridor approach, and specifically the need for hard and supportive hard and soft infrastructure. Later in the day, we're going to talk specifically about the services sector, and we know how important that is specifically to spur services trade in the region. What do you believe can we do better to both harness the potential of the private sector through joint partnership, to perhaps invest in hard and soft infrastructure that can support a diversification of trade away from its current sort of commodity focus to unlocking other potential areas?
Should I respond, or is that okay?
Okay, is there anything else? We have a question there as well. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Luanda Mpongose with SIRE. Thank you so much for the very valuable keynote address. That was very thought-provoking. Just on the point you made about the special economic zones and corridors, I just wanted to get a sense, to what extent is AUDA engaging with RICS at this point? Thank you.
Thanks very much. One of the issues that you didn't touch on is the fact that different countries have very different capabilities, very different sized economies. And of course, we sit today in South Africa, which is, has a sort of hegemonic position within Southern Africa. How do we make sure that liberalizing of trade within Africa can actually not be an extractive process for the bigger economies, but can actually build regional value chains and local capabilities? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think we have do we have a question from the online audience? Yes, please. Okay. Okay.
Can I?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Joseph Matola. I wanted to ask on the point that AUDA NEPAD supports the promotion of inclusive and environmental friendly activities within the AFCFTA. So on the inclusive part, I'm mainly interested in micro, small, medium enterprises, as well as cross-border trade. What has been the experience in getting this? As well as cross-border informal traders. Yeah. So what has been the experience or the challenges that you foresee with regards to the SMEs and cross-border informal traders engaging in trade under the AFCFTA, and what can the state parties or other stakeholders do to help in having these small businesses engage more in trade under the AFCFTA? Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, let's make that the last question perhaps for this round. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please proceed with your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, my interest, my comment, and also a question is I note the ambition of the African Continental Free Trade Area, but we are also cognizant of some of the structural barriers that exist. The history, what it has shown for the continent in terms of the hegemonic interest of those countries that are also the West that also happened to colonize Africa, moved from slavery. And just to underscore the point that I want to make is that when the world sort of like reached a consensus that slavery is a heinous crime against humanity, we have a system that compensates the slave owners, not the enslaved. When we say colonialism, let's end it. We have a system that rewards those that plundered the world and colonized others. And like in the case of Zimbabwe now, you have a country that is settled with the debt to compensate the white farmers for trying to assert the sovereign rights over land. So when you are talking about trade, to what extent are we grappling with the global hegemony, with the global geopolitical fragmentation, and also the hegemonic interest that is designed to put down Africa in the bottom of the global value chain system? So that reality, how are we countering it? How are we not relying on the experts, the funding from the very same people that are also in a way having an active role of undermining the continent's development? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask that you identify yourself, please?
Sorry, Mukasiris Banda is my name, the coordinator of the Stop the Bleeding campaign in Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, please.
Before I do my best to respond to all interesting inquiries and questions raised, actually, I didn't expect that my humble intervention would raise such plenty of questions. And also, before I proceed, I would like to highlight that I'm not in charge of everything within the African Union Development Agency, so I will do my best to just to respond to the best of my knowledge. And if still some questions remained unfully answered, you are most welcome to approach either my colleague Pamela or myself, and definitely I will revert your inquiry to the competent colleagues at Audanibad who deals with this issue in details, to give you more details, to give more elaboration about what exactly Audanibad does within this issue with that domain. So in brief, we all agree that the successful implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area or the economic integration agenda in a broader sense in Africa will count on the successful implementation of three interlinked pillars. The first one is infrastructure. Even if we do have diversified production and industrial structures, without having the adequate networks of roads and transport, we will do nothing. So the first enabling pillar, if I may say, is adequate, high quality infrastructure. And again, the infrastructure is not confined only to the hard infrastructure like roads, railways, seaports, and airports, but also includes a soft one like standards and conformity. We all agree that we couldn't exchange goods and services unless we do have a consensus about what are the minimum standards of a certain good and services to be entitled to move from one market to another. So within this context, Audanibad is leading a very promising program called Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, whereby plenty of infrastructure projects, cross-border projects are being prioritized and implemented. As you may aware, in last February, the second Dakar Finance Summit were held to raise more resources, financial and technical resources, to push forward the priority cross-border infrastructure projects to be implemented and to reach the bankable stage where we can see the real impact on the ground. So this is the first pillar. The second pillar, again, which is relates to the industrialization. Unfortunately, Africa is still dominated by the raw materials-oriented production and industrial structures, which is unfortunately similar across the various countries. So again, if our commodities and production structures are similar from one country to another, we wouldn't expect a significant increase for the intra-Africa trade due to the implementation of the CFTA. So this is, again, second pillar we need to prioritize, is to promote industrial capacities, not only from the perspective of diversification, so that to increase the potential of integrity or economic integration between one country and another, but also, again, as mentioned by one of the inquirers regarding the high value added. Currently, many African countries are engaged in what we call the global value chains, but unfortunately, we are engaged on the lower levels, processes and aspects of the global value chain. So we need to push it forward to the upper stream side of the value chains. The third pillar relates to trade facilitation. So again, we need to have high quality infrastructure, both hard and soft, then diversified and higher value production within the various countries. And the third one is to promote trade facilitation. You know that signing the ECFTA is not the end of the story. A lot of things need to be done to complete the negotiation about taxes, schedules and reconciliations between countries. And also one of the main thing mentioned by my brother here, again, the distribution of costs and benefits across African continents is not equal. It's not even. That's why one of the successful enablers of the ECFTA is to establish a joint fund to compensate the losers from the winners. Again, just to make sure that, again, we don't expect an even distribution of costs and benefits. This is a theoretical scenario, but at least to mitigate the concerns and the expected losses to be experienced by some of the countries. So these are the three pillars. When it comes to the private sector, we all agree that the main economic players in the continent is the private sector. So no way to expect successful implementation of the ACFTA or else continental flagship programs without effective engagement with the private sector. Within the Outani Pad, we do have a lot of initiatives and frameworks and programs to encourage the private sector to come on board, to implement and take the lead of the development process as stipulated in Agenda 2063. One of them is a continental business network, where we do have a representative of all relevant stakeholders across the continent at all levels, continental levels, regional levels, and national level as well, to listen to their feedback, how to better inform the various policy frameworks and instruments adopted by the relevant African Union organs, and how can we encourage member states to address these concerns, again, at the end of the day, just to ensure effective and active engagement from the private sector. Also, as I mentioned, one of the key initiatives to promote or to encourage the engagement of the private sector with a special focus on the medium and small enterprises, Outani Pad plays a lot of efforts in this regard. One of the key initiatives is 100 million SMEs. Again, as mentioned by one of the speakers, countries differ when it comes to their needs. And even within the same country, the SME sector differs according to the economic sector they are engaged in. So through this initiative, we are likely to dispatch fact-finding mission to each country to speak with the relevant stakeholders, not only the government, but also the representative of this sector on the ground, to listen to their needs. Then design goal-oriented, country-specific capacity buildings to respond to the needs of these sectors. Also, when it comes to the motivation to increase the value addition in the production sector across the African continent, we also advocate for implementation of Kaizen initiative, which is overarching goal is again to improve the productivity and the competitiveness of the private sector with a special focus again on the SMEs one. Also, one more thing I need to highlight before I conclude my question. Again, out NIBAD, we prioritize evidence-based guidance to ensure that what applies on country X is not necessarily to be applied on country Y. That's why we currently implementing a huge project called impact assessment study, just to underline what are the exact needs of countries on the ground to successfully implement the ACFTA agreement in relation with other EU frameworks, like, for example, the Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa, labeled as IDA, along with EU SMEs strategy, along with other, again, as I mentioned, relevant frameworks, just to give evidence-based and country-specific policy actions to be implemented by all relevant stakeholders, either on the continental or regional or national levels, based on the findings we get from the respective stakeholders. I hope I did respond to most of questions. And again, you are most welcome to approach me or to approach my colleague here, Pamela, if you do have further inquiries about exact initiatives or programs led by Out NIBAD, so that we can share more detailed information. I submit.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I'm not sure whether you want to add. We also have someone from the AFCFTA Secretariat that would like to just respond to some of the questions, but I'm going to hand over to you first.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just very quickly to add to what my colleague Mr. Mustafa had said, we at the African Union Development Agency, we also, there was a question on how we organize ourselves with intra-Africa trade and across borders. We also have a program called the One Stop Border Post, and that is to facilitate efficiency of the trucks that are transferring goods across the borders. And also we have undertaken, or we're undertaking, various studies to support the continental free trade, one of it being the impact of trade on the young population. We're doing assessment studies as well. But importantly, with Oxford University, we also partnering on and understand that climate change is reshaping the world economies, and it is important, as much as there's a lot of focus on the global north. African countries have to adapt, implementing very ambitious regional economic integration initiatives, and that is what we at AUD and NEPAD is supporting, so that we have a climate-proof development. In all countries, as it was mentioned, it is at various levels. But in cases like this, it's important to leverage dominated green, and climate, favorable technologies in countries that we could work with. But I think most importantly, with our work, we're also working to develop an African green trade strategy, and green trade and investment strategy. So that will sort of highlight, and also because we know that the world is being shaped by this, by climate change. So we're trying to address that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Luanda, is it Dr. Francis Mangeni? Dr. Mangeni, please go ahead. You've got the floor.
Yes. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, distinguished colleagues, and good morning, participants. Right. So my name is Francis Mangeni. I was just trying to answer these questions in the Q&A by typing out some of the answers. Unfortunately, I crashed. I think that's how Laura picked up what I was trying to do, and then asked me to try to intervene, which I'm happy to do. Though, of course, I note that we've overshot the time allocated for this session by maybe 5 minutes or so. Right. So regarding the first question on customs and excess duty losses, I could probably advise, just as our colleague Sakra was pointing out, that there is the AFCFTA Afreximbank Adjustment Facility, which has been put in place to assist countries financially that experience short-term revenue losses. However, could I add very quickly that experience in the regional economic communities, such as the East African Community, COMESA, shows that when you form free trade areas, revenue losses can occur, but they will be very short term. And in the medium term to the long term, revenue collections pick up for the reason that FTAs do not touch VAT. They don't require you to remove VAT, which seems to be the better source actually of revenue collection. But then thirdly, could I point out that it is important for countries to broaden and deepen their revenue bases domestically to diversify their sources of revenue rather than counting on customs duties. Globally, since the 1950s, customs duties have been coming down, so they cannot be a promising source of revenue collection. It could be perhaps internal tariffs, including income taxes. Right, then how to implement, how to assist synchronization of implementation strategies. So there is an initiative which is championed by the Economic Commission for Africa for assisting countries to prepare national AFCFTA strategies, as well as REC level or regional level AFCFTA strategies. So far, close to 40 have been done. So countries are encouraged to prepare their own national strategies. These strategies include identification of export priorities in terms of products and markets, putting in place of national implementation structures, both at the high-level political level, like a ministerial committee, as well as technical working groups. For instance, in Ghana, those technical working groups are structured along the boosting intra-Africa trade clusters, such as transport, logistics, financing, things like that. And then lastly, how is the SADC EU EPA rules of origin? How do they impact the intentions of the AFCFTA? Yeah, I should point out that there are challenges arising from relations with some of our partners like the EU, the US, China, in that some of our business models on the continent seem to prioritize access to those markets in the north because they are developed country markets and probably, presumably, bigger. However, what we are seeing increasingly is that actually the African market is more dynamic than most of these northern markets. So what we recommend to economic operators, industry, and of course to governments, is to look carefully at the continental market as a promising market, and therefore to structure their production models, their plans, all right, to meet the rules of origin of the AFCFTA, and therefore to produce for the African market. I think that's what I can say for now in terms of questions that are in the Q&A. I think the others are introductions. Or how can education be shaped by the AFCFTA? Right, so we have got Reverend Seydou Dodu, who is CEO of the Africa Trade Academy. I'm sure he will go deep into that when his time comes. And the last one was to Auda Nepad. I'm sure they have answered it, or they will answer it at some stage. But I really welcome the partnership that the AFCFTA has with Auda Nepad. We have concluded a very constructive MOU. We have held actually a joint retreat, and I think our working relations, close working relations, will be good for the benefit of the entire continent. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mangeni. It's actually a great segue into the next session, which is focusing specifically on those initiatives to enable the commencement of trade under the AFCFTA. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Francis Mangeni, who's the head of trade promotions and programs at the AFCFTA Secretariat. But before I hand over to him, I just wanted to just comment very quickly on the point that you've made, Pamela, around sustainable value chains and the importance of ensuring that that we pursue trade that is climate friendly and sustainable. So actually, SAI has been doing quite a bit of work on this topic over the last year, specifically also framing it within the context of how do we support biodiversity in our region, because that's one of our big treasures that we have and that we can offer actually to the world, and that we really should look after very, very carefully. And also one of the topics that I hope in future we will be working with you on from a SAI perspective and a AUDA-NEPAD cooperation perspective. So with those few words, I want to say thank you very much. First of all, for the support of and the joint cooperation on this particular roundtable, and a very big thank you also to Dr. Sacker for your comments. As you said, you elicited a whole range of questions, which is great. It shows that there's a lot of interest in the topic. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this morning. So with those few words, I think let's hand over then to Dr. Francis Mangeni. Our other two panelists for the session is Mr. Brendan Vickers, who's the head of the International Trade Policy Section at the Commonwealth Secretariat, and Mr. Dodo Saidu, who's the CEO of the Africa Trade Academy. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for introducing the panelists. I think you introduced me as well. So I would like to just dive into what I'm calling a blockbuster session. I'm sure the next one will also be a very good session. Maybe it will be a thriller even, you know? But let's start with this one. So if you allow me, let me just share with you some timelines so far on the AFCFTA. So we started negotiating the AFCFTA in June 2015. Actually, the negotiations were launched at a summit hosted by South Africa. And then in under 3 years, on the 21st of March 2018, we had actually concluded negotiations on the essential elements, namely the main framework agreement, the protocol on trade in goods, the protocol on trade in services, and the dispute settlement mechanism. So the agreement was opened for signature. And then within just over a year, in 2019, in May, the agreement entered into force because we had secured the required ratifications, namely 22 of them. And then fast forward to 2020, in February, we elected the first Secretary General. In March of that year, the Secretariat started operating, but with a staff of just 2 individuals, namely the Secretary General himself and his special assistant, who were actually working at from the Commission of the African Union in Addis Ababa. But as we speak now, the Secretariat has grown to 222 individuals with an average age of 35 years, so it's a very young Secretariat, full gender parity, 50-50, including at the level of directors. Right, then October 2022, we wanted to demonstrate that actually the AFCFTA works. So we put on what's called the Guided Trade Initiative, which basically was a scheme to show that consignments can move from country X to country Y using the AFCFTA rules and procedures and documents. So I actually happened to co-chair the preparatory meetings for this initiative, which was quite inclusive. No country was excluded. Countries that participated came forth voluntarily. to try to pioneer it and prove to their private sector that this can actually work. And the AFCFTA provides opportunities for them. Now, as we speak now, we have a high political ownership demonstrated, for instance, by the fact that we have got 47 ratifications and then 54 signatures. That means out of a total of 55 African countries. That means we have only one country that hasn't signed yet, namely the state of Eritrea, and just 8 countries that haven't ratified yet. We hope to get universal ratification. Now, regarding the substance of the agreements, on goods, we have got 46 tariff schedules, including one from SACU countries, which we welcomed greatly. And then for services, we've got 22 services schedules covering 5 priority sectors, which are mostly infrastructure services, which will help us to actually trade both goods and services. The services sectors include communications, transport, financial services, tourism, and the business services, which include movement of professionals. Now, that's about the timelines. But could I also add that the Secretariat has undertaken effective diplomatic agency across the world with the clear narrative. Everybody talks about the AFCFTA now, or mentions the AFCFTA when they talk about Africa. A lot of analytical work and interest on the part of academia has been shown with the studies from the IMF, the World Bank. You can see we're having this event as well on the AFCFTA. Leadership has been good, both on the part of the Secretariat and the champion of the AFCFTA, the former president of Niger, where unfortunately there has been a coup recently. Right, but also President Cyril Ramaphosa, President Paul Kagame, all these presidents have provided strong leadership. Institutions are in place, they have been activated, the Council of Ministers, the committees on trading goods, the committees on trading services, and their subcommittees. And we have mobilized immense resources and partnerships from across the world, the USA, Britain, China, Japan, Korea, and so on and so forth. And we have got partners across the continent, like Auda NEPAD, Afreximbank, and also across the world. We have completed the negotiations more or less with new protocols on competition, investment, and intellectual property. We are soon completing the 2 remaining protocols, that is digital trade and women and youth in trade. So with these introductory remarks, I would like now to turn to our panelists. We have mentioned the Guided Trade Initiative as a demonstration that the AFCFTA works. Now, beginning with you, Reverend Said Dodu, who is the CEO of the Africa AFCFTA Trade Academy, sorry. Dode Seidu, yes, I hope I'm pronouncing that well.
Correct.
Yes. First of all, I welcome you to this panel. You're joining us virtually. Thank you so much for making time. So what's your own assessment of the performance of the AFC, or of the Guided Trade Initiative? And shall I say prospects? What do you see as the way ahead, as the pathways ahead, in terms of any challenges which have been there? So just share with us your appreciation of the Guided Trade Initiative. Over to you, Reverend Dode Seidu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mangeni, and also thank you to South Africa Institute for International Affairs for this opportunity. Yes, in terms of the Guided Trade Initiative, I think it was a very, very, very good initiative undertaken by the Secretariat. Of course, given the timeline you have given, things, I mean, the processes so far have been very, very fast, thanks to the state parties, the RECs, and of course, the work of the Secretariat and the AU Commission. It was good as an initiative to test the legal instruments, the operational instruments of the AFCFTA. And to a large degree, I would give it a thumbs up as an initiative. What was expected is that it should have led to continuous trade after it kickstart the process. So my understanding of what the GTI was supposed to do was to create some kind of demonstration effect, so that when it is done, then the state party will see how to go about it. So in terms of my observation, I think that is a limiting factor. The fact that the level of trade has not automatically continued after the October launch until now. Now, I would say that in my observation, I observed that the level of publicity that went with the launch of the Guided Trade Initiative did not go the same way with the level of reception of goods on the other side. So, for example, I mean, we as observers, we're watching how goods were moving from Kenya to Ghana, or from Ghana to Cameroon, or from Rwanda elsewhere. But as to how the goods arrived, how they were received, what were the processes they went through, we don't have that documentation. In fact, I was speaking to a colleague a few days ago, and I said, where are the lessons learned? It might not all have been successful, but it would be good to see from the perspective of the Secretariat and other stakeholders as to what went on, what went right, what went wrong, and what could be the lessons learned for others who are looking to trade. Now, that is the first observation. The second observation is that there is a lot of information that is not available, of course, regarding the trade opportunities that the AfCFTA presents. So that limitation affects even those countries that are watching. You know, I'm sure by now, Dr. Mangeni, you know that already. There are countries on the continent that we can consider the first movers, maybe like the likes of the countries that went ahead to ratify, Kenya and Ghana, the first two to ratify. And then, of course, there are those who are also watching to see, okay, the skeptics, you know, just trying to find out how this will go. So that is my observation. However, I think that from my understanding also, there is a lot of interest from countries to join the next batch of the Guided Trade Initiative. If it will be successful in the next round, then a lot of information has to be shared. I was even expecting that the companies that participated in the Guided Trade Initiative would have gone ahead in their own trade relationship, because the idea was that there was a lot of B2B that was held in preparation for the Guided Trade Initiative. It would have been helpful, or it would have been a good thing to see that these businesses were already engaging with the businesses they had met. I mean, whether you know, the ones that were successful in trading, or the ones that were just have met and are considering a trading relationship. So I'll pause here, and if there are any questions, I'll take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dode. If you don't mind, I'd like to congratulate you on the Academy. That's a pioneering initiative, as well as your newsletter. I'm a subscriber. I receive it, and I find it very informative, very useful. Yeah. Thank you so much for your remarks. And I'm sure they have been noted by the participants. And I'm sure the participants are all very happy to have heard them. Could I just add that the next edition, this year's edition, will be in October this year, and it is supposed to be hosted by the government of Rwanda, just as the first one was hosted by the government of Ghana, where the Secretariat is based, fittingly so, if I may add. So we have noted that you expect the Secretariat to have come forward with lessons learned. Actually, the Director for Trading Goods and Customs, Mr. Muhammad Ali, is proactively, you know, going across the continent, listening to industry, economic operators, regulatory agencies about their experiences, and trying to factor this in the next edition of the Guided Trade Initiative. He's also writing actually about it. So we also know that information is not readily available, but we encourage economic operators, government officials, to regularly use the AfCFTA website, as well as the TRILAC website. Actually, TRILAC has a lot of information on the AfCFTA, And I would like to add, I expect to say as well to have a lot of information going forward on the AFCFTA. But we know that we need to share more information, and using also, initial conditions to call upon the companies which have experience now on the guided trade initiative to continue being engaged, to continue using it. Yes. Now, turning to my good friend, Dr. Brendan Vickers. It's a long time. I last saw you at an event, I think in Cape Town, was it? Organized by the Nelson Mandela School of Public Health.
Yes, good to see you.
Yeah. Yes. But I'm glad you are still going strong. Yeah, right. So now turning to you, of course, I remember you have written a lot about the Commonwealth advantage, which you have been exposing quite a while. And I'm sure that many countries now understand what that actually means. A number of countries that participated in the Guided Trade Initiative are actually members of the Commonwealth. So what's your take from that perspective as a Commonwealth, as an official at the Commonwealth Secretariat on the Guided Trade Initiative? What's your take on it? How can you, for instance, work with the Commonwealth countries that are in the AFCFTA to promote utilization of trade opportunities under the AFCFTA using such initiatives? Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Francis. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to actually be back in the African continent, albeit virtually. It is a sunny morning in London, but I really do miss the African sun. Perhaps just to say, yes, the Commonwealth has been a partner in this journey for some time as well. We, through our Hubs and Spokes program, we had trade advisors at the African Union Commission at these very initial years that you spoke about with the negotiations to assist with that. And we definitely stand ready to assist our member countries to implement the Continental Free Trade Agreement, particularly to develop the complementary policies that are needed to take advantage of these market access opportunities and to develop regional value chains. I think it is quite instructive, as you pointed out, that in terms of the Guided Trade Initiative, we had so many of our Commonwealth member countries participating in that. One step back, the Commonwealth advantage, for those that aren't familiar with it, to summarize it in very simple terms, are the invisible bonds that connect us in the world's ultimate network of networks. So we have a shared history of commercial relationships. We share a common language when it comes to trading among each other in the Commonwealth, including in Africa, which is English. We have the common law heritage in many of our countries, which is the basis of international law and a lot of trade law. We have large and dynamic diasporas in each other's countries. And these factors all come together in the Commonwealth to reduce trade costs by 21% on average. So this is really interesting when we look at the Guided Trade Initiative. A lot of those countries that were in the initiative already have had intensive trade relationships with each other, either within the same regional economic communities where they already had duty-free access. So I think the benefit for me is of this Guided Trade Initiative would be how we have that business matchmaking between importers and exporters, between countries that have with the weaker trade relationships, because the Commonwealth advantage is already at play in Africa. At the time, 19 of our African member countries were driving 2/3 of intra-African trade. Since then, we have 2 new African member countries that joined the Commonwealth, Gabon and Togo. And speaking to the government, one of the motivations was really using the Commonwealth as a platform into the English-speaking world, because that opens up far greater commercial and investment and trade opportunities. So now we have 21 Commonwealth African countries. So we think it's been a very useful pilot exercise. It's been good as a proof of concept that we are moving away from being stuck between negotiation and implementation and actually getting some trade going in the continent. But we know that overall, the Guided Trade Initiative is not the overall AFCFTA regime that we would like to see. We do need to scale up the Guided Trade Initiative perhaps to the second round. We do need to conclude some of the outstanding negotiations, particularly on the rules of origin, that we get the actual AFCFTA regime up and going. Interestingly, in anticipation for this discussion today, my colleagues and I did some calculations, just some back envelope calculations about what would be the benefit, for the SACU countries, for example, if they joined the Guided Trade Initiative. And I would say that it was quite challenging to find the 96 products specifically, but from one of the news and the articles that were out there, we found that if the 5 SACU countries would join the guided trade initiative, that would add around $41 million to that trade, taking the total trade to 277 million. It was really interesting that the big winner there would be Eswatini, which is largely perhaps in the case of sugar, and South Africa as well in meat and sugar products. But for Botswana, Lesotho, and Namibia, there were almost no exports in that sector. So that's where the focus should be, I guess, is those weaker relationships of connecting these countries that don't have trade with others in the continent. Interestingly, we just expanded this. If all 54 of the AFCFTA members participated in this initial first phase of the guided trade initiative, that would be at about 1.6 billion of trade in the sector. That's 5 times more than is currently taking place. So yeah, I think I agree that it's been a fantastic initiative. We also want to congratulate the Secretariat, the AFCF Secretariat, of all the work that's been done. The website is fantastic. It is so user-friendly in terms of finding the tariff rates and the rules of origin. So that's a big win, particularly for SMEs. But the big thing is that really that the focus should be on concluding the negotiations, and that we shouldn't become complacent, with these guided trade initiative. I was also just thinking as a final point from the days when I was in the South African Department of Trade and Industry, these guided trade initiatives can be really important to handhold the private sector and to unlock those blocked opportunities. So for example, when we were trading with China, we identified 10 value-added exports from South Africa to China, particularly for this importer matching. When we were trading with Brazil, we had a very innovative arrangement to deal with NTBs, which we called wine for swine. So we would deal with the challenge around the wine exports into the Brazilian market and the pork imports there. So this all does play an important role, and I think it's been a fantastic initiative to show what can be done.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Brendan Vickers. Yes, so Dr. Brendan has told us that the GTI was a useful proof of concept. He has even gone ahead and given us some numbers, Yeah, if SACU was to participate in the guided trade initiative, it should get at least $41 million. This is really, did you say million or billion? I think million, is it?
41 million, yeah, because it's
million,
still, these products are it's such a selective handful of products that these countries trade. But I think this is the point. This is the baseline. So in a year from now, do we go back and measure what's happened?
Right, exactly. Very useful indeed. In fact, we need this kind of computations. And I'm sure when I tell our colleagues at the Secretariat about these numbers, they will reach out to you immediately for a partnership, on this. Now, but can I just clarify, you did these computations on the basis of the 96 products that are normally talked about. Well, the guided trade initiative doesn't limit you to any particular product. You can actually trade any product that you feel you have an export market for, any at all. Out of the 5,000 or so products in the HS9, the harmonized system, provided, of course, that product has got a rule of origin. And as you have pointed out, Brendan, we need to complete negotiations on the rules of origin. We have done quite well, actually. We are at about 90% of all the tariff lines have rules of origin. What are outstanding are rules of origin in the area of textiles, right? Especially clothing and textiles. Though we are making good progress, which at the moment I think constitute just about 8% of the outstanding rules of origin. And then automotives. We have got some product lines with rules of origin, but others are still outstanding, especially on motor vehicles. So textiles and clothing and automotives, those are the areas where we need to make quick progress in order to complete the entire exercise. But remember, as the Reverend Dode pointed out, I think we have been moving quite well. The momentum has been quite high. If you consider where we have reached since from 2015 when we started, in just under 6 years, or we can even say under 10 years. That's impressive compared, for instance, to the Doha Development Agenda. It has been dragging on for years and years. People who were born have now come of age and it is still unfinished when it was started in 2021, as well as EPS for that matter, right? Yes, so we take that point that we need to complete this outstanding negotiations. A very important priority. This year, in fact, happens to be, the theme for this year happens to be implementation of the AFC. So thank you so much, Dr. Brendan, for your intervention. We're actually doing quite well on time. We still have, I think, about 25 minutes to complete this session. So I would like to welcome questions from participants. You can verbalize them, take the floor and speak out your views, your contributions, or ask your questions, or you can type them in the chat or in the Q&A. Actually looking at the Q&A, Reverend Doty, there's already a question there for you. Actually, there are two questions there for you. On education, would you like to begin this session by answering those two? And then we can take more questions.
Sure.
On education, have you seen, I hope you have seen them. On
I've seen the one on how can education be shaped by the AFCFTA. So,
right, and there's another specific one on the role of the AFCFTA Trade Academy. What you actually do? Yes, what do you actually do? Yeah. Okay.
So let me take the first one. So how can education be shaped by the AFCFTA? So the AFCFTA protocol on services, of course, is looking at liberalizing trading services across a number of sectors. Of course, education is not in the first 5, but in the next iteration, I'm sure Dr. Mangeni can speak to that, education would be included as a sector to be liberalized. So what it means is that those in education services can provide the services in the usual 4 modes, depending on how the liberalization goes for each country. So I foresee a situation where, of course, across the continent, education levels are not the same, education capacities and competence are not the same. So I foresee a situation where we should have more, cross-border trade in education services. The spur in cross-border trade in education services. Already from the work we do as an academy, training those in professional and business sectors, we're seeing a lot of interest in providing their services across the border. So I think that is one of the ways that education can be spurred on the continent across that. Of course, when it comes to services trade, I look at a number of things which I think from the AFCFTA Secretariat, the RECs and the state parties, we need to work on. One of them is the level of regulatory cooperation between, let's say, the sectors regulators across countries. So if it's education, then the education regulator of one country to the other, or the education regulator of one REC to the other. The second thing would be the issue of equivalence of qualifications, how we address, if somebody gets trained in one country, how do they, do we determine that this qualification is the same as in this country, or by what means does it become equal? So for me, those two things will be critical. So for the private sector, I think that is where some of the educational standard bodies, educational examination bodies can begin to look at ways to create some kind of continental certifications or regional certification that can meet international standards. To the second question, what does the Africa Trade Academy do? So we are a capacity building organization that is focused on providing all kinds of training for SMEs, so small and medium enterprises, even micro enterprises, large businesses, government officials, customs officers, to be able to understand the emerging trade landscape on the continent. Even though we are called Africa Trade Academy, we're not just focused on the AFCFTA, we're focused on all trade aspects that concern Africa. So for example, in the coming days, we're doing a webinar on the EU Green Deal and its impact on Africa. The EU Green Deal, though it's the EU's, would affect Africa. We're interested in the EU EPA with Africa, whether it's with the EAC or with Kenya. We're interested in the US interest in Africa in terms of trade. We're interested in providing capacity when it comes to the UK partnerships with individual countries in Africa, or the developing country trading scheme that was launched by the UK recently. So these are things that we're interested in, and we're aiming to help everybody understand. Now, what is the rationale for this? Our rationale is that trade is rule-based, and if people don't understand the rules, they cannot participate effectively. So you could be sitting at a trade commission, sitting as a negotiator, and you need capacity. You need to understand the leather industry. You need to understand, how SMEs behave. You need to understand how cross-border trade happens. And that is where Africa Trade Academy comes in. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Reverend Dode. I'm sure Brendan would like to add to this. If you would like to add to what our colleague has said on this issue of education, capacity building, awareness creation, you're welcome to do so. But also, Brendan, I'm sure I can draw your attention. I'm sure you have seen, but I can draw your attention to some questions in the Q&A. One specific, some are actually specifically addressed to you, but I know you are an official of the Commonwealth Secretariat, so I would like to protect you from having to make any political statements. You don't have to make any political statements about Eswatini, yeah, but you can deal with the substance of issues such as finance. For instance, how can we improve access to finance? I think credit, the cost of money is too high, the cost of credit on the continent. If you share that assessment, or if you share that assessment, what can we do? Our sister Catherine, I'm glad to see you, Catherine Grant, also asks from Tutua Consulting, also raises an issue on SMEs. Probably we can give her the floor to also make some intervention on this, in addition to just asking a question. And we also have our sister from Botswana, I think Malawi as well, who asks, how can women be supported to participate in this guided trade initiative? So over to you, Brendan. You're welcome to take it.
Thank you, Francis.
Yes.
Thank you for the cover on that. I would say that just perhaps in terms of our support for Eswatini economically, the Commonwealth is a champion of small states. We are the only organization that in the world that is really standing up and trumpeting the cause of small states, because 33 of our 56 members are small states. So we work quite closely with particularly the SACO member countries, where all 5 are Commonwealth member countries, and 4 of the 5 are considered small states. So I know my colleagues are having a workshop with UNCTAD in September with SACO on developing a regional e-commerce strategy. And I think this is probably the kinds of support the Commonwealth can give in terms of, you're talking about the education, the building the skills for particularly SMEs, women and youth to participate and take advantage of what's happening in the African continent. This is what we do very well. We work in partnership or on our own to deliver capacity building workshops, training workshops. We had one in Cameroon for women-led SMEs. The very interesting thing they said, anecdotal from that workshop, was, the AFCFTA sounds great, but where do I find the truck drivers, to be transporting the goods? We had a workshop in Nigeria on product standards to be able to export into the ECOWAS market and also beyond. We also do digital boot camps to help build digital literacy, digital skills for the digital economy, particularly among women, youth entrepreneurs. And I think this issue of finance is so important as well. We've done a lot of work on trying to identify where the gaps are, how to improve access to finance, and we're always available to assist our members countries on that regard. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Francis.
Right. Thank you so much, Brendan. We appreciate your intervention. Dode, are you speaking? Did you want to add?
Yes, I if it's okay with you.
Just take maybe 2-3 minutes. That should be fine.
Okay, so I was going to add, to the questions about the SMEs and the women participation. And I just wanted to highlight that in recent times, we've conducted a study to look at the competitiveness of Ghanaian SMEs, for example, to trade under the AFCFTA. And we identified a number of challenges, if it's okay for me to share that just quickly. So access to finance being one, the key issue being the cost of the finance. The second one is access to stable and cost-effective electricity, especially for businesses. So that is another one. Then the number of domestic taxes, because of global trends, countries are increasing taxes, whether mostly indirect taxes, and these are affecting businesses. The types of complexity of businesses and their products. So here, SMEs generally have similar products. I think Mr. Mustafa mentioned that in terms of the level of products that are traded. If you participate in many fairs involving SMEs across the continent, you really don't see the distinguishing factors. We look at the business services and the types of innovation. So again, what is the spectrum of services available? I think the focus has been a lot on goods, but not much on services. So to look at that. Then, of course, we've mentioned capacity building, both for many SMEs. Yes, the questions is always about what is this? I mean, much as we try to break it down, be it the tariff schedules, be it the rules of origin, it's always complex. And I noticed that it takes maybe at least 2 to 3 capacity building sessions that somebody can even come to a first appreciation that, okay, this is what it is, and maybe I have to see where I can plug in because I kind of like understand it. So with these, I want to say that whilst we're looking at the Guided Trade Initiative, we've also focused a lot on, I mean, if I say we, I'm looking at our academy, a lot on the SMEs. SMEs, in my view, would take a while to get to the trading stage. I know it's a controversial statement. Some SMEs can go from ideation to market, but usually it seems to take a longer time to go there. Why can't we look at those businesses in our countries that are already stratified and look at those that are already close to market, and see where we can tip them quickly to be able to engage? So for me, that would be one of the ways I would really look forward to that. In terms of the national strategies, the national strategies to terms of the AfCFTA, mostly, of course, the one I've seen is the one for Ghana. It's quite broad. I mean, it looks like a broader framework with little actionable and immediate plans that can help to realize the trade opportunities. So we need to look at product diversification, look at where each country has some advantage of, and thanks Dr. Vickers for that calculation. Which products, yes, 96 unique, maybe that is what is unique to the SACU countries. And so once it's unique, it gives them an advantage in the context of AfCFTA. I think I'll pause here now. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much. Right, before I give the floor to Lionel Sachi and Catherine Grant, let me just mention also, just to build on what the colleagues have been saying, that a lot of information can be obtained from the chambers of commerce at home, in South Africa, everywhere else, and from the ministries responsible for trade. Actually, the ministries responsible for trade have inquiry points exactly to do this kind of thing, to provide you information. But they also have their mandate, in fact, their commission, to undertake capacity building around the country for stakeholders, including for youth and women and other groups as well. So please use the AfCFTA Secretariat, but also the national structures, which actually have got the duty and should have the resources to help you to participate. Could I just give you an example? In the last edition of the Guided Trade Initiative, most of the operators were SMEs, and actually women. The importer of Exide batteries from Kenya into Ghana was a woman. The importer of coffee from Rwanda into Ghana was a woman. You see, yeah. So actually, women are taking advantage of this initiative of the AfCFTA. They are utilizing it, and very successfully so. So I would like to appeal to colleagues who are women, who are youth, who are SMEs, not to fear or hesitate at all. Just get on board and participate. And also, by the way, there are preparatory meetings which are already taking place for the next edition of the Guided Trade Initiative. And any economic operator, a logistics person, a potential exporter, a potential importer, an individual or a company can join. It's not just for government officials, but it's also for economic operators. They can also join in these meetings online. They are virtual meetings. And then you can ask any questions. You can actually strike business deals, establish networks and contacts during those meetings. Now, over to you, Lionel Sachi. Would you like to take the floor to make your
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning. Am I coming out clear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Oh, yes, fantastic. Okay, my name is Tawanda Sachikonya. I'm from the University of Cape Town. Thank you very much for the insight. Well, that's a name I use sometimes when I log in, but my full name is Lionel is actually my second name, and my full surname is
all right. Please proceed.
Sorry for that explanation. Okay, right. But my name is Tawanda Sachikonya. Yeah. So thank you very much for the insightful and informative presentations. It's actually good to see Dr. Brendan Vickers, who was very helpful when I was undertaking my PhD research. So warm greetings, Dr. Vickers. My question, I meant to actually express it in the first round, in the first panel. So it's directed to my the NEPAD colleagues, probably Dr. Sekur, but also I'd like to hear your views, Dr. Francis Mangeni. Practically the significance and vital importance of infrastructure is very clear, especially if genuine continental trade is impossible without adequate infrastructure development across the continent. But we all know that capital and funding are an issue. In fact, it's actually a huge concern. So my question is, where will the funding for infrastructure development come from? Who are the key donors? Are they African states? Is it African private enterprise? If it's not, why is that the case? And then maybe for Dr. Sekur, you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned the issue of Kaizen processes. I just wanted to know if this, does Japan assist with that? Since this is a Japanese process with regards to enterprise development. So that's just it. But the key question is on infrastructure funding and the source of that in order to supplement and buttress continental trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, colleague Lionel and Elias, somebody else, for the question on infrastructure. So I will provide an opportunity for the colleagues from outer NEPAD to respond to that if they wish to do so. Could we listen to Catherine as well, Grant? You wanted to ask the floor to make an intervention.
Thanks,
if
Dr.
you would like.
Yes. Yes,
Go
can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go on.
Yes, well, good morning to those of you in Africa. I'm currently in New Zealand, so it's good evening. But thanks very much. And it's been great to listen to the discussion and to hear the optimism and the progress that has been made in taking the AFCFTA to this next level, as you say, focusing more on implementation. I did want to respond to a couple of points that were mentioned by Dr. Vickers. One is we are having these discussions actually quite actively at the moment in the South African business community about joining the Guided Trade Initiative. So it was great to hear from you, Brendan, about the potential value in that for SACU to become part of the GTI. I think that certainly that is something very much supported by South African business. And that is something we have also requested in our NEDLAC discussions on the AFCFTA. Where I think that there is also potential value for the participation of South Africa in particular is in making connections between larger operators who already engage in cross-border trade with smaller firms who maybe do not and would struggle to do so on their own. And I think that would be something that I'd be interested to know whether that is already addressed in the initiative, or whether that there is scope to make those linkages to enterprise development, bringing smaller enterprises into distribution networks and so on that already exist for cross-border trade in Africa. And then my second point really was about the finance issue, which I know you've briefly touched on, but that I did want to emphasize because it's the top of my mind after having spent some time on Monday earlier this week, talking to small and medium enterprises, trying to understand the AFCFTA, and the access to finance is something that comes up, extremely regularly and at the forefront of the minds of many actors. So I'd be keen to know how the Guided Trade Initiative has dealt with that question, if at all, or whether there are plans for it to make linkages to initiatives that can assist with the question of access to finance, particularly for smaller firms. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Right. I think those were questions, but there were more of contributions, actually, substantive contributions. So we have got just under 5 minutes left for this session. We shall round up by giving the floor to NEPAD if they would like to answer the question put to them on the infrastructure, infrastructure financing, though I believe it was just an observation about the enormity of the requirements for infrastructure financing. And also, I don't know whether there is anybody who would like to ask a question there at the conference itself, the ones who are attending in person. Is there anybody who would like to maybe make an intervention?
If you want to, we've been listening very quietly. I'm sure there's some questions in your mind as well. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry. Thank you. I'm Lukovi Seke from the AUD NEPAD. I work with my colleagues. From the measurement perspective, we observe that the only way for us to allow our countries to boost their trade is to adopt innovation. And we understand that innovation can occur without research. But to be sustainable is really important for our firms to invest much into research. And some countries are even going through the scheme of securing a tax rebate in a way that for firm investing more in research, there is a possibility to benefit from a deduction from the tax. And that fit also through the Sustainable Development Goal 9.5, where all the countries that are part of the United Nations should make sure that they invest at least, they increase their spending in R&D. In Africa, the minimum we have since 1980 from the Lagos Plan of Action is 1%. And for European countries, especially those part of the OECD, is 3%. And we know Scandinavian countries are really going very high, and Japan, in its policy, they are already targeting 5% of GDP as investment in R&D. So now we have these recommendations for countries, is either to invest in R&D or die or perish. Because what is happening now, we are having emotional citizens and emotional traders that are really serious. They can say, okay, we don't need product from country X, Y, Z. And country need to educate their population because we are dropping our borders. We don't need free trade to become something that is going to be, again, another issue of war and conflict. So at least I'm happy the Secretariat in Ghana can make sure that we get ready in a way that we help our citizens and traders to understand the importance of dropping our borders, becoming competitive. And the only way to become competitive with our product is to do a bit of research. Otherwise, we should not do everything. We have just to focus on on product where we are very good, and then we flag the issue of competitive advantages than just remaining focusing on the comparable advantages. That's what I can say as far as the measurement of the level of R&D on the continent is concerned. Very little has been done to date, and I'm afraid. And to conclude, I need to also to flag the issue of informal sector. How may we formalize the informal sector? The informal sector is just a response to most of our economy. Some of our economy are being punished because when you sanction some leaders, we have citizens that are suffering. So I think there is a way also to engage using another platform. How may we punish, in bracket, some of the politicians from the global dynamic? Because if you punish a country like Zimbabwe for decades, but now what we are having, 80% of firms are in the informal sectors because they have to survive. So we need to be realistic if we need to save our population. And if we don't do that, then we'll be violating some of the goals as part of the the Agenda 2030. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, my brother. So we have run out of time, very unfortunately, and we must conclude now. So what I'd like to do is to give a chance to our panelists just to make their closing remarks. And as I keep saying, maybe to NEPAD as well. So beginning with you, Brendan, would you like to make your closing statement? You are muted, I think.
Thanks, Francis. I think that working?
Yes, we are hearing now.
I think
yes.
my parting salvo is that implementation of the AFCFTA is not going to be a one-off event. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a process. The good thing is we know that there are always preference utilization challenges in FTAs. We know what the challenges are going to be. They're not so unknown. There will be others, but that means we can provide solutions and we can think ahead. And I think there's so much opportunity in this agreement, and that we just need to all come together, business, government, civil society, all the stakeholders to address these challenges, as we start moving towards the more scaling up of trade under the broader agreement.
Right. Thank you so much, Brendan. And we need to bring down the cost of credit as well through strengthening this financial sector as well. Right. Reverend Dote, your parting shots.
Sure, thank you. So I like to say that the AFCFTA is an opportunity. I think I'm quoting you, Dr. Mangeni. You said it's ready, trade and invest across Africa. Remember, state parties have a role. State parties are very, very much responsible for getting their companies and their countries to trade. They are the ones to make it easier for their business to get finance. They are the ones to formalize the informal sector. They're the ones to action the trade agreement at the very, very least level. Again, private sector have a role to play. Many a times I've heard many countries or private sector being afraid, quote unquote, of what opening the border would mean for their businesses. But less do I hear about what opening the borders would mean for them in other countries. So let's think about how we can take advantage of the agreement. And again, capacity building, capacity building, capacity building. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Reverend Dote Seidu. Right. NEPAD now, I think there's a question to you on the infrastructure. No? All right, maybe let me just say that the African Development Bank actually puts a lot of money into financing infrastructure. So we should disabuse ourselves of this feeling that it has to be partners from outside who will always fund our own infrastructure. Yes, the World Bank, of course, will always be active. Development partners will be active. But increasingly, we are saying that the African Development Bank, the Afrexim Bank, and our own countries are putting quite a lot of money into both hard infrastructure and software infrastructure. Right. With this, I turn the floor back to our chair to continue the deliberations. Thank you so much for the opportunity to moderate this session. I congratulate Saya on the event. I think it's going very well. Please hold more events like this. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mangeni. That was really great. And thank you very much also to our two experts on the panel, Dr. Brendan Vickers and Dr. Dodu Saidu. I think sort of big takeaways from that session was first of all that the guided traded initiative is to be welcomed. I think one of the questions that I had is when can we expect the second initiative? I think some questions around how important it is to ensure transparency around these initiatives, because it's an important learning opportunity as well for our respective member states, but also very, I think, critically also for the private sector, because at the end of the day, it's actually companies that are trading with each other, and we need to keep that in mind. We need to ensure that it is possible for them to trade, that we make it easier for them to trade. I think one of the things just related to transparency, it's important to note that most of the member states and I think, in fact, also states that are not current participants in the GTI, have all developed national implementation strategies. And I think that's a really helpful departure point for companies that are interested in using the AFCFTA to trade within the region. So perhaps one of the initiatives might be for the AFCFTA Secretariat to publish those national implementation strategies to make it easier and more accessible for companies that do want to participate in trade under the AFCFTA. And then the big question that we didn't answer in the session that I hope we will come back to in our next session is finance. And a little bit, how can we discuss in greater depth access to finance, because that seems to be a significant issue. So we're slightly over time. It's now 6 minutes past 11. Can I ask that we take a very short break and try to be back here at 11:15 so that we can start promptly with our next session. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, and we'll see you back soon again. For our online audience, we'll start in at 11:15 sharp. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oops. Hi, everyone. Great, just trying to get the hybrid going. So it's great if you've stayed to join us for the second part of today's event. My name is Justin Visagie. I'm an economist from the Human Sciences Research Council, also a lecturer at the University of Free State. And today we're going to be talking about the power of the service sector in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The contribution of services embedded in manufactured products in world trade has greatly increased since the 1980s. Indeed, it's hard to imagine a competitive industrial base without a well-functioning logistics, financial, marketing, telecommunications, and IT sector. The role of services is further intensified in the era of big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, the Internet of Things. So structural transformation, what we all need on the continent, is evidently not only about manufacturing capabilities, but critically depends on these interlinkages and the development of a wider service ecosystem. Yet there are also signs of a more fundamental shift in the nature of services trade in recent decades, particularly as commercial services are increasingly crossing borders through advancements in digital connectivity. The share of service exports in world trade has increased from 9% in 1970 to over 20% today. Such increases have also included emerging economies. The unprecedented scale of urbanization in Africa also demands considerable investment in infrastructure with expertise in engineering, construction, finance, and related services. The AfCFTA is set to be a game changer for Africa's service center. The AU noted during its annual assembly in February 2023 that the focus on trade and services should be on 5 priority areas. That is tourism, business services, communication services, financial services, and transport services. And the World Bank forecasts that improvements in the trade environment could boost Africa's service exports by 50%, with the largest impact in logistics, infrastructure, then telecommunications, and last, financial development. So there's clearly a lot of promise from the AFCFTA to boost trade and investment in services. But I think we would be naive to think that the benefits will just flow automatically from tariff liberalization. What is the role of services in fostering regional value chains on the continent? Which subsectors should be prioritized and in what ways? What are the priorities for trade reforms? And does AfCFTA offer the mechanisms and muscle to realistically achieve all of this? Let's hope our speakers can give us some answers today. So we've got 2 people on the panel. First, Mr. Yusuf Daya from Afrexim Bank, who's the director of the AU AFCFTA Relations and Trade Policy. He's online, so welcome to you, Yusuf.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And we also have with us, sitting next to me in person, Mr. Tabela Mulea from Tutwa Consulting, who is a trade and investment lawyer and policy researcher. Welcome. So I'll start with you, Yusuf. Just at the sort of highest level, what potential does the AFCFTA offer for boosting the services sector on the continent? Do you agree that it could be a game changer?
Well, thank you, Dr. Justin, and thank you everyone for the invitation, particularly Saya and Audan APET. Just a brief introduction to who we are as a bank. Afrexim Bank is a Pan-African trade finance institution covering 52 countries on the African continent. And we have been probably one of the key champions of the AFCFTA, recognizing the transformative potential the agreement holds for the continent. The earlier panel discussion discussed around areas of trade in goods specifically, and the potential of the agreement to increase the levels of intra-African trade from its current levels of around 15 to 16%. For when it comes to the services sector, I think what has been quite unique is that when we decided to start negotiations on this agreement, we put services upfront on an equal footing with trading goods, which traditionally in FTAs has usually not been the case. And I think it's a recognition of how important the services sector is to the African economy. Dr. Fasaki, you just mentioned the growth in services trade globally. And services is not only something that is traded as an item itself, but it plays such an important role in enhancing the diversity and quality of the manufactured goods that will be traded under the Trading Goods Protocol. It's a facilitating instrument at the regional level that this linkages between services as inputs in the production and export of manufactured goods and in our industrial ambitions provides immense opportunities. You talked about the business services, the construction services, financial services, and I know the question on financing is going to come to me at some point again. But these priority sectors provide immense opportunities. So even if we look at what the current state of play is in Africa, we find that in the services sector, largely two sectors dominate trade in services in the continent, and this is your tourism sector and your transport sector. So opening up the opportunity for intra-African trade in services by creating a liberalized environment through the protocol on trade in services does provide immense opportunities. It opens up opportunities in non-traditional sectors, which are equally important, particularly given that we live in a digital economy. A lot of things are being delivered virtually. A lot of things are changing. The infrastructure needed around that, the investments needed around that. You need a liberalized environment to attract the investments for Africa to expand into non-traditional services. So the services sector, yes, it's critical not only in terms of expanding the level of Africa's trade in services. I think we always lament Africa's share of global trade in goods being around 3%. I think services fare even worse, so building a strong services sector in the context of the AFCFTA is not only going to enhance intra-African trade in services, but puts Africa in a better position to become a player in the global economy in trade and services. So yes, there's a short answer. We believe it's a game changer.
Thanks so much. So you've alluded to the fact that service trade is a lot more complex these days than merchandise trade. I mean, you produce it, put it in a container and ship it over borders. But when it comes to services, there are different ways in which it can happen. We know that the WTO have the different modes of trade where someone can actually travel into your country, or you can travel to their country and produce the service, or you can actually establish a sort of local presence through a commercial enterprise. So it's clearly a lot more complex, and it would appear that non-tariff barriers might be even more important than just direct tariff barriers. Do you have any insights on the role that the AFCFTA could play in addressing these NTMs?
Yeah, I think, the non-tariff barriers in services, I mean, there's no tariffs in services really. So it's all related to non-tariff barriers. And the modes of supply you talked, whether it's establishing commercial presence, facilitating the movement of people, ensuring that services can be supplied across border. I think what the AFCFTA is doing and what is very critical is the regulatory cooperation frameworks under the AFCFTA to ensure that these non-tariff barriers are eliminated and that the actual liberalization of the services that will take place under the protocol can be practicalized, if you like. Yes, we create the liberalized environment through a legal instrument, and through regulatory cooperation, we ensure that these things are actually implemented and effected. There's also the issue around, there's some of the practical aspects around it. And some of the areas that I think the AFCFTA should look into going forward in some of the services sectors. And one of the examples I want to maybe highlight is, yes, we're liberalizing financial services as a priority sector. We will create regulatory frameworks around that. But going beyond that, to facilitate stronger integration, perhaps we should be looking at something similar to what the EU has in terms of its passporting system, the financial passporting system, to create a truly integrated system across the continent for not only financial services. I think this can apply to a number of other services sectors, where registration in one state party within the AFCFTA can then facilitate operations across the continent.
That sounds really interesting. For those of us who might not be familiar with the EU passporting system, do you want to just give us a little bit more of an idea of what that practically would mean?
So what happens in the EU under the common market in the EU is that, particularly for financial services, a bank that is, for instance, registered in France or Germany is allowed to then establish operations across the European Union and provide its services, whether it's creating a physical presence or providing it through one of the modes under the WTO. So it's a single sort of regulatory arrangement that allows cross-border operations.
Great, thanks. It's really interesting. It sort of ties into my next question, which is how do you think the AFCFTA could make it easier for multinationals to actually set up new branches and local enterprises? Because it's not just about sort of sending the service digitally, but often it's about getting a commercial presence, getting those branches established in different countries. Any further comment on that, on establishing a commercial presence and the role of the AFC?
Well, I think, under the protocol, certainly they're negotiating that as one of the mode of supplies. You know, I think it's Mode 3 is establishing commercial presence. So they will be focused on liberalizing the market to enable companies and institutions to establish commercial presence across the continent. I think also what is important is, what is always very interesting to note is that in 2018, when the AFCFTA agreement was opened for signature in Kigali, there was also a protocol on the free movement of people, which was opened. We've seen significant progress on the protocol on the AFCFTA, but the protocol on free movement of people, which I think is essential and very necessary to facilitate particularly trade in services, needs to be looked at. I think the uptake has been particularly slow, and I think it's an important complementary tool to the AFCFTA. So while the negotiations on the protocol on services and the respective modes are ongoing, I think there also needs to be a push on the movement of people. I know within trade in services, there is discussion on movement of business people, but I think if we want to really promote an integrated market for the services sector, we need to look at the movement of people as well.
Great, thanks. I already see some questions starting to flow in on the chat, so let's keep those coming. But before I go there, I'm going to now switch down to the floor to Tabelo, who's sitting next to me. Tabelo, nice to have you with us. Again, just starting at the sort of highest level, what potential does the AFCFTA offer for boosting the services sector? Do you agree that it's going to be a game changer? Why or why not?
Thanks, Dr. Psaki, and thanks, Saya, for inviting me to speak at this very important event, which kind of builds from some of the projects that I've been involved in, I think, for the past year or so. So this is really an interesting one. So just to respond to your question, I think if we start by just building on what Mr. Dyer was saying about the services as a sector, and the importance of the FCFTA and kind of making sure that this is facilitated and we actually make sure that it's a growing sector in the African context. So if you look in Africa, you see that the relevance of the services sector has actually been downplayed for a very long time for quite a number of reasons. Of course, looking at the economic development theories to start with, that economic development, particularly for developing countries, for African countries in particular, I would say, would have to start with the traditional theories that would say it has to start from industrialized manufacturing, and then you go to industrialization, and then the services sector coming after all those. So with what's happening in Africa, I've seen that this is the services sector has actually been playing a very important role, for about 20 years so far, but with very little, that's been recorded on how exactly this is happening, or recording actually the impact it has on GDP, if I could give that as an example. But with the FCFTA actually recognizing it and also assisting with, I think, with the first in the first session we heard about the 5 subsectors under the services sector that have been identified at the FCFTA level. We have tourism, we have transport, we also have business services as an example. I think with the FCFTA in play, kind of playing this kind of we're dealing with an Africa that has a lot of fragmented policies, right? More importantly, in the services sector, where you find that in some of the countries don't even have a regulatory framework in place at a national level or at a domestic level. So I think this FCFTA kind of brings all those together and harmonizes all these policies to make sure that we can actually see the impact that the services sector has, and we can actually record and actually make sure that those that are at an informal level, I think there was a comment about most of the businesses being informal. So this is actually the case in the services sector as well. But with the FCFTA and also the opportunities it provides, businesses, the small enterprises, the SMMEs could actually use this as an opportunity to register those informal businesses, and the services sector can actually be formalized and be regulated particularly properly, and the benefits of it can actually be seen, and it can also contribute to integrating the economies of Africa through the vehicle of the FCFTA as more like broadly continental framework that brings together all the fragmented policies. So yeah, I think the FCFTA will be very important at this point for harmonizing and actually bringing out the benefits of the services sector in Africa.
If I can just probe you a bit more on that, Yusuf already mentioned that it's not necessarily about tariffs in the service sector, but the non-tariff barriers. So, this harmonizing of regulatory frameworks, practically speaking, is enough being done to actually implement it? Can you give us your reflections on what's been done so far to make sure that we actually are addressing these mismatches? Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Isaac, for that. So I think in Africa, one of the key obstacles or one of the key challenges to the success of the FCFTA, broadly, not only speaking for the services sector, but for the FCFTA in all the sectors and all could be trade in goods or for the services, one of the key challenges is actually the NTBs. And as much as a lot has been done at a national level, at a regional level, and also now with the FCFTA also providing for the elimination of NTBs, you could say, in as much as all those initiatives are still in place, NTBs remain a challenge. And I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done if we are to really realize and see the benefits of the FCFTA really coming to fruition. So I think we can acknowledge what has been done at a regional level. We also have probably, for example, at a tripartite level with COMESA, SADC and EAC, they have a mechanism that's been in place for some time now that actually allows the SMMEs and businesses that are trading within the region to report NTBs that they encounter at the borders. And that would be brought to the attention of the designated national focal points and national monitoring committees at a national level that can then deal with those. But the problem now is that with the NTBs, it takes more than just reporting to the NMMCs. Some of these are political issues, for example, that really needs more than just a government official sitting at who are largely from the chambers of commerce and also departments of trade and industry. So it needs more than that. It needs political will from the member states themselves to deal with these particular barriers to trade. So I think we can acknowledge what has been done so far, but I think there's still more that needs to be done. There's still more that needs to be done to harmonize all these kind of initiatives and efforts that are already in place at a regional level. So I think to do that, we can have clear roles defined for each one of these levels. So what's the role of the member states themselves? What's the role of the RECs and the institutions that are already set up to deal with the NTBs? And also, what's the role of the Secretariat in Ghana in harmonizing all these efforts? That's already done at a REC level, at a national level. So I think, we still have a lot more to do if we are to deal with NTBs and to make sure that the services sector is actually bringing benefits to Africa. I will just stop there.
Great, thanks so much, Tebelo. So on the chat, we've had a few questions, which I'll pose to both of you. From Gwyn Foster, it's how can we progress discussions about education programs and services relating to info technology and data integrity standards? So obviously about the human capital aspect to it, particularly in the tech sector. Oh, and Gwyn follows up and says, how do we get guidance on value chain traceability? So 2 questions. And I wonder from the floor if we also have anyone. Okay, we'll come back to the floor a little bit later. Let's take those 2 questions. In fact, we've just had another one posted, so let me throw it in there quickly. It's asking on the restrictions that are included in Mode 3 by many countries, and the fact that some of the largest economies, South Africa and Nigeria, have not yet submitted final offers in the first 5 targeted sectors, and the very limited market access offers in Egypt and services. So just a comment about some of the practical barriers in Mode 3 investment. Great. So I'll start with you, Yusuf.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. These are quite interesting questions, and I have to admit a little bit difficult. So for the first one, on progress discussions about education and services relating to info technology, I think this is critical. In the earlier panel, there was a discussion around intellectual property and the need for it. We know that one of the major sectors for intra-African trade potential and under the AFCFTA, and in fact for Africa's transformation, is the digital economy, the ICT sector. We know about the infrastructure investments, the deficit in infrastructure. I mean, if an SME is not able to access the internet, they lose a massive market opportunity. It's something as simple as that. However, I think also, sorry, did I disconnect?
No, you're still with us?
I'm still with you. But one of the other areas, what is quite interesting, I was reading a document, I think a few weeks ago, that spoke about the investment in innovation across the continent. And particularly it was looking at issues around patent registrations in Africa, which is sometimes used as a measure for assessing the level of innovation. And we see that in Africa, Africa registers around 1,500 patents annually, compared to a region like Asia, which does almost 600,000. And even of that 1,500 that are registered in Africa, it is largely done by non-residents in Africa. So the investment in education, particularly in the digital space, in the digital economy, is imperative. I know that the African Union will be focusing its theme next year on education, but I think there needs to be a concerted effort within the context of the digital opportunities that exist in the continent to invest in our research institutions, to invest in our universities, incubation labs. So for instance, the bank under its SME program is facilitating the emergence of technology hubs, is facilitating the emergence of SME incubation centers that are focused on technology. So I think these are critical areas going forward to try to give some practical effect to the market access opportunities that are created by the AFCFTA. And also recognizing that, the reality of Africa is that our businesses are dominated by SMEs. And in many cases, not only SMEs, but micro enterprises, one-man businesses. And the digital economy provides an opportunity for those one-man businesses to become big business. So serious investment is needed in education, serious investment is needed not only in the infrastructure, so the softer side of things, the capacity building around this, and ensuring that they're able to access the opportunities under the AFCFTA. I hope that provides some answer.
Thanks, Yusuf. No, that was really useful. Tebelo, do you have any follow-up?
I think I'll relate mine to the need for infrastructure and those, and also go back perhaps to the issue that came from the first panel about financing infrastructure, the necessary infrastructure. I mean, for those. So I think for me, for those, in as much, I mean, all those sectors are key sectors. I mean, we have the 5 that have been identified in the FCFTA, but all these are very key sectors for the services. But I think what's more important is the infrastructure, you know, to enable all these, to make sure that all these can actually, you know, are put forward. So I think financing all these, the issue of infrastructure really, I mean, the issue of financing really comes as a very important issue that needs to be considered if we are to make sure that the education, I mean, itself. You can also relate that very much to the ICT. You know, we refer to digital economy also becoming very prominent in Africa. We saw with the, you know, the COVID-19 how things just all became kind of virtual classes, digital, and this is also, I mean, testimony to that we are able to have, I mean, a very big meeting like this with just 5 people in the room and the rest joining virtually, but it still had the same impact as a physical meeting. So I think infrastructure financing is a key one for this. And I think just like what was said in the first panel, other than depending on donors, I think African countries have actually more other options that they can explore other than, you know, donors. One of those could be what is called where you I mean it's more like another type of public-private partnership where it's called asset recycling. You know, measure. It's also one of those that African countries could actually try to make sure that they partner with the private sector, with investors, through, of course, the investment protocol as FCT also has provided. So if these are all put together, I mean, all these protocols are different, but I think at the end, they all work towards achieving the same goal. So I think if all these work together, and to make sure that all these, the different sectors actually interlink through these protocols, I think a lot can be done for all the sectors, other than all, more than just what the 5 sectors that have been identified in the FCFTA. So I think, yeah, I'll just stop it there.
Great. I'd like to focus our attention on this issue of financing investment. It's come up in the previous session, really important. Africa has a huge infrastructure need, but financial services are also an opportunity as a direct service to different people living across the continent. So Yusuf, you obviously have a background being at Afrexim Bank. I wonder if about in supporting intra-regional trade.
Sorry, you broke off for a little bit. I know you mentioned that I have a background in with Afrexim Bank, so now, and then I lost you for a few seconds. I didn't get the question.
Yeah, we were wanting to talk about this big issue of actually financing the investment needed, but also wanting to know the specifics of the Pan-African payments and settlement system. How will that work? What role will it play? It would be great to get your insights.
All right, so let me take the Pan-African payments and settlement system first. Effectively, one of the challenges we found in Africa, a consistent challenge that hinders intra-African trade, has kept intra-African trade at its stubbornly low levels, is the issue of currency inconvertibility. I think we have around 42 different currencies in the continent, and trading with your neighbor requires you to go through foreign corresponding banks, either in the US or Europe, to settle a transaction using hard currency, which creates a binding constraint. And we know the challenges a number of countries are currently facing in terms of access to foreign currency. So the Pan-African payments and settlement system is something the bank initiated along with the African Union and AFCFTA Secretariat. And what the system does, it allows for payment and settlement using local currencies. So a South African exporter to Egypt, the Egyptian importer could pay using Egyptian pounds. The South African exporter would receive his money in South African rands. That is what the Pan-African payments and settlement system does. What we do at the level of the bank is we provide the infrastructure and the financing to facilitate that settlement and clearance, and to ensure finality of settlement. The system is up and running. It was piloted in the West African region. We currently have 9 central banks sign on to the system. I think over 40 switches signed on. We've also been engaging the Association of African Central Banks to ensure that this system is rolled out continentally. We estimate that it will plug a leakage in the financial system of $4 billion annually that Africa pays in terms of correspondent banking fees outside of the continent. So we see this as a game changer. This is certainly one of our flagship initiatives. And we believe it will help boost the levels of intra-African trade because it reduces the burden on the need for exporters and importers to access foreign currency. So that's perhaps on the one hand. On the infrastructure financing gap, if I had the answer for that, I think I could retire if I had the answer for that. It's a perennial challenge. We talk about, I think AFDB estimates the infrastructure financing gap at anywhere between $160 and $200 billion annually. We add in the trade financing gap on the continent, which is estimated at around $120 billion annually. So we see there's a significant gap on financing within the African continent. And I think one of the main challenges, again, comes back to if working from a bank, coming from a bank's perspective. And I'll be first to put up my hand to say we are sometimes guilty of this as well, is that we are comfortable with risks of our large corporates. Yet 80% of businesses in Africa are SMEs. The banks are not necessarily geared up. We know a lot of banks do focus on SMEs, but the risk profile of these SMEs sometimes make banks averse to extending the finance to them. So I think a lot of work needs to go into bringing SMEs and bankers together. For bankers to understand SME business models and for SMEs to understand what banks look for in terms of risk and risk mitigants to ensure that we are able to access avail finance to these SMEs to do their businesses. This can be done through capacity building. We can work with development institutions like ourselves, AFDB, to put in place partial risk guarantees that will catalyze local financial institutions to actually extend the credit needed by these small businesses. But certainly it's a challenge. We know that the private sector has to step up as well to come into support. We know that currently governments are fiscally constrained, which was going to create greater pressure going forward. So we need a strong private sector. We need the opportunities of our foreign partners to come in as well. And we need strong development finance institutions. We need our African governments to invest in the African financial institutions that understand the African market and understand what the AFCFTA means for the continent, the transformative potential of it, and unlock the necessary capital to deploy to plug some of these gaps.
Great, thanks. It's really helpful, particularly the inside perspective. Tabelo, the other sector which often gets spoken about a lot is on the logistics side of things. We know just because there's geographical proximity in Africa doesn't mean there's actual connectivity. And one statistics that I've found is that 18% of African exports are to other African countries, whereas in other regions like North America, it's 30%, Asia, it's 58%, and Europe, it's as high as 68%. So clearly there's a lot of room for more intra-African trade. But of course, it's about this infrastructure issue and trying to make sure that goods and services can travel between borders much more easily. What are your insights into the logistics sector and what more could be done in terms of using the AFCFTA to take us forward?
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Fisaki. I think I'll start by referring back to what said in the first panel about the work that Ouda NEPAD is doing relating to corridors in particular, and also they also mentioned their project in one-stop border posts. I think those two are very important. Like if you're referring to this sector, and also how it's actually a drive of trade facilitation in Africa, and making sure that trade under the AfCFTA is actually achieved. So I think what will need to be done really is to make sure that the one-stop border ports, I think they're just a concept for now. I don't think if you go like practically at a border where they say they have one-stop border ports, I can give you an example of the Beitbridge border post. There is a one-stop border post, and if you go there and you look at the queue of trucks that are waiting to pass at the border, it takes longer than what a real one-stop border post would actually take. So I think we need to have mechanisms that actually track that and provide that data in real time that shows how long does a truck take and what can be done to actually make sure that those challenges are dealt with for these already existing one-stop border post areas. So it just shows that I mean, the concept of one-stop border post in Africa hasn't really been successful, I could say, based on what you see at the borders themselves. And the corridors, I think that's other issue that also needs to be addressed if you to make sure that the logistics as a sector is also a success. Corridor management is very important to ensure that. So I think it needs to be looked at in the context of the AfCFTA. So that also goes back to the issue of infrastructure, I think, in financing, because that all needs infrastructure and we need the finance for that. So I think it needs to be, I'll go back to my point about the interrelation between the different protocols. So investment is one of the key, the key ingredients for that. So I think using the vehicle of the protocol investment, we could actually secure the necessary investment to make sure that it's directed towards these very, key sectors, like the key infrastructure, to facilitate trade, like one-stop border posts, the border posts themselves, and also, the roads, because most of the the trade that happens in Africa is through road transport, and the roads are not really in a good condition to ensure trade facilitation for that matter, and also the corridors disconnected in a way. So I think all this needs financing and infrastructure to make sure that the logistics, as a sector, actually becomes successful. Because I think it's one of the most important sectors for trade facilitation, other than dealing with the issue of NTBs, as well, also pointed out. I think they are the ones who will tell you, about the NTBs, which also, one of the key in NTB, which also being the queues at the border posts, which is chiefly because of NTBs, of course, which is an infrastructure issue. So I think financing of infrastructure is very important for the success of the logistics sector.
Yeah, and obviously building the capabilities to operate these ports and railways effectively. Too many of our countries, have sort of rank really low in terms of the efficiency of actually managing these posts. I also again want to give the opportunity to the floor. If I can get any takers. Yay, okay, great. So let's have our first round from the floor. This will probably be our last round for questions. So take your chance while you've got it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maximilian Heumann from the Embassy of Germany. Very insightful. We talked about trading products and now also services. We talked about trafficking money and investment. Very insightful. What I miss a bit is the role of consumption behavior of private households as long-term enablers of a sustainable economy. So maybe you could give me your assessment of the role of the consumption behavior of private households all over Africa, and how do we ensure parity in growth between the countries if one country like South Africa is developing more into a modern and wealthier world, whereas other countries are lacking this development.
Great. Thanks very much. And if you can just introduce yourself, one sentence. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Lukovi Seke from AUD NEPAD. I think something have been raised in terms of the quality of road, railway, sea, in terms of infrastructure. But I need to get just your advice and how we can address this problem. Number one, the issue of peace and security. We're still having conflicts in Africa. You never see that in Europe. The case of Ukraine is something else. How may we overcome that? Because we had a motto to silence the gun on the continent. Without peace, it's even difficult to trade for those who are in the road. Number two, cultural dimension. We are thinking that Chinese are consuming their own product. And South Africa say proudly South African, they consume. So are we ready to consume our own product? I know that China, Ghana are making vehicle. Are we ashamed to use those, to buy those vehicles? Or I need just to buy a Mercedes-Benz? Those aspects I need also to flag them. I don't know what your view on that. Thank you.
And we've got one more from the Q&A from Klaus. I think it's directed towards you, Yusuf, but it's talking about the PAPSS being encouraging, but obviously the challenge that common monetary area banks are now charging foreign exchange charges on the transfer of funds from, for instance, South Africa to Namibia. This increases transaction costs unnecessarily. It is necessary to work on the charges of financial institutions. Competition alone might not change this trend of increasing costs. Great. So, Yusuf, maybe you can start with your reflections on those questions.
Thank you very much, Justin. Yeah, I think the comment from Klaus it's more of a comment than a question, really, and it's quite disheartening. You know, I know the Southern African region very well. I worked for SACU for many years, so it's quite interesting that this is being done, and it's actually a bit disheartening that it's being done in a context of where we try to facilitate trade. This is certainly one of those additional costs that will just make business more uncompetitive while we are pushing for more competitiveness. We are hopeful that PAPS will address some of these issues because we will have the central banks as the signatories to the PAPS agreement. But obviously it's related specifically to the payment infrastructure. But I think there's probably a need for a broader discussion at the level of the African central banks or even at the level of the African Union to try and limit some of these charges that are put in place. And I don't see why in the common monetary area they would use foreign currency. It's actually quite strange. I didn't know about it. I'd certainly like to get more information about it.
Right, thanks, Yusuf. So, Bello, any comments, any responses to our speakers from the floor?
Yeah, I think the issue on the political instability, I think that's one that needs a political dialogue between the member states themselves, and because with the FCFTA, I mean, particularly looks at the economic integration part of things. So I think if we need to have that integrated into the conversation, I'm sure that could be done at a political level by the member states themselves. I mean, looking at how the impact that it has on economic integration, of course. So I think that's an area
this one there is no point because
I think maybe just push on to Bella.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, so yeah, so that's as I was saying, I think this is and one that needs a political dialogue between the member states themselves and looking at the impact it has on economic integration and the impact it could also have on the implementation of the FCFTA, of course. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, consume, to be proud to consume what we have as African.
Right. I think the issue around that is really more on standards, because the standards of course of the goods from the different African countries also differ, and then you would have one country preferring the standards of goods from a particular country, which another country might not meet those standards. So I think it's more on the harmonization of standards of the goods that we can have countries actually consuming the goods from each other. I think it's really an issue of standard harmonization, which I think is also very important, of course, if we were to really have successful trade in goods coming from each other, I mean, within the African member states. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Some of those were also comments, so very well received. One burning issue that I'd really like us to get both of your reflections on before we go is that, you know, there's often a lot of mistrust, unfortunately, between the private sector and government. And so has enough been done to involve the private sector in developing these frameworks and identifying priorities for trade reforms, particularly with reference to the services protocol? I must say, in my own anecdotal experience of interviewing service firms and asking them about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, they say, what's that? So I'd like to know, do you have any insights on that process? And has enough been done to actually get business involved in guiding the development of these reforms? Thanks. So I suppose we'll have to I'll ask maybe Yusuf again. Can you start? Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Justin. You know, you'll never consult enough. The private sector, it's so wide, it's so diversified across the continent that it's difficult to engage to the extent where you would please everyone. But I do know that the Secretariat has done extensive engagements on a number of the protocols. In fact, I participated in many of them. Many of them were held virtually, several of them were held physically. But certainly there's always opportunity to engage more, to refine what is happening. You know, the agreements themselves, the protocols have review clauses in them, which allow for continued information, continued engagement with the private sector to ensure that they are delivering on what they are supposed to do. An initiative that we've been undertaking with a number of partners from the bank's perspective, including AFCFTA Secretariat, Auda Neped, my brother Mustafa is there in the room. He can tell you about this. What we've launched in the last 3 years is a private sector survey. We do a survey, an annual survey, which tries to drill down on some of the particular issues the private sector feel are important in the context of the AFCFTA and intra-African trade, the policy issues specifically, where they see challenges, what they would like to see happen. And what we are doing through this survey is we are using it as a platform, not only to identify the issues, but then to develop a policy advocacy agenda for the private sector so that we can take this information to the AFCFTA, to Auda Neped, to the African Union, to ensure that the private sector's voice is being heard. We collaborate very closely with with the African Business Council, which is the umbrella body for the African private sector in the continent, and also working with them to increase their capacity and outreach. Working not only with the continental bodies, but also the regional business councils, the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industries. I think one of the challenges we have in getting the private sector voice heard is, in many instances, the private sector is not organized. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen, particularly at the national levels, to organize the private sector so that they can influence policy discourse. Because ultimately, I know that in South Africa, how it works, in many of the Egypt, the same, how it works, is that the private sector has regular engagements with their negotiators, with the policymakers that go and sit at this table and negotiate. So in many instances at the national levels, there's a need to strengthen the private sector so that their voice can influence national positions. But also, I think at the continental level, it's important to bring the private sector together so that we can engage at a continental platform to make sure the private sector voice is being heard and is being reflected in this agreement.
Okay, thanks. Very useful.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything to that, Tabelo?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Visak. So I think the other thing, I think we have to also look at the reality, you know, of the private sector we're referring to in Africa, that largely it's the SMMEs. And in as much as much has been done, and to sensitize them on the FCFTA and what the benefits are, I think access to that information is really an issue. You know, with most of the businesses being SMMEs and membership to business associations and national and regional coming at a fee. You know, I think that's also another issue that really makes it a little bit difficult for the information to really go out to the economic operators in the form of SMMEs. So I think if the existing national and regional economic associations or business associations could actually be capacitated to ensure that the joining fees for the SMMEs is actually at a lower rate, that is more affordable, that they could have easy access to this information, that could be a first step to achieve, access to information for SMMEs and for businesses. And the other thing is that I think if a channel for dialogue could be created to relay information from the Secretariat to the regional level, as well to the member states at a national level, and also to the private sector, that would also be effective to ensure that the private sector actually aware of the FCFTA. If you go to the ground and actually have a conversation with the SMMEs in particular, most of them don't even know what the FCFTA is. Most of them don't even understand what the benefits are, of the FCFTA. So I think it's those issues that really needs to be addressed if we are to make sure that they are also integrated in policy formulation, as has also been highlighted. Capacity building for the existing business associations, and also creating a channel for dialogue that also includes SMMEs at a national level.
We've got a question that we'll take live on Zoom. I think it's from Benjamin Okobundu. Benjamin? You should be able to unmute and put your camera on. Okay, perhaps we won't have a question from Benjamin. It gives us a chance for anyone else from the floor. So I think it's time for a wrap up from our side, and particularly from our speakers. I wonder if you want to just give us what's your most important take homes for us in thinking about taking trade reform and maximizing the opportunity of AFCAFTA in the service sector. What are the three most important things that you'd like to leave with us? I'll start with you, Yusuf.
Thank you very much, Justin. I don't even know if I want to say three things, but let me just say that the AFCFTA is the platform for Africa to take its economic destiny into its own hands. For far too long, we've been reliant on external partners. We saw the joy this brought us during COVID. We see the challenges we're facing now with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's lamentable that for a continent that says we have 60% of the world's arable land, we are still food insecure. We believe that the AFCFTA provides the opportunity for Africa to really shape its own economic destiny for a massive young population that needs to be provided economic opportunities. That's why the bank has been such a strong supporter of the AFCFTA. It's invested a lot in developing initiatives and programs in collaboration with our partners at the Secretariat and the level of the African Union as well. We really believe that the AFCFTA is a game changer for the continent, but it requires all the stakeholders to come to the table, the private sector, the governments, the banks, NGOs, civil society, to make this work. We need to communicate the benefits and the opportunities to our young generation and encourage them to take advantage of what the integrated market, if we bring, once the AFCFTA is 1.4 billion people, collective GDP of over 3 trillion, collectively, that would be the 5th largest economy globally. So there are immense opportunities, and you just need to realize it for the benefit of the continent. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yusuf. Tabelo, what would you leave with us?
Yeah, I think in agreement with Yusuf, I think the FCFTA is really a game changer, for Africa. And if we take the FCFTA for what it is, I mean, the FCFTA, the good thing about the FCFTA is that the FCFTA is not a bully. So there's a lot of efforts that has been happening at a regional level that the FCFTA actually encourages that we continue with those efforts that are feeders into the FCFTA processes. So I think if we do that, and then in collaboration, a lot can actually be done to achieve, the the objectives of the FCFTA. So I think if we take learnings from the processes at a regional level, and also some of them that have been happening at a bilateral level, in terms of trade facilitation, also looking at the importance of services, and the overall, objective of the AU, Agenda 2063 to unite Africa. I think a lot can actually be done under those, guidances that the FCFTA provides, and with the institutions already in place. We have had what was said by the agents, the Outer colleagues about what they're doing. And, with other, think tanks like what, we're gathered here, through SAIA. I think all these institutions, if they could come together and we make sure that efforts actually, done to make sure that everyone is together, in terms of achieving the objectives of the FCFTA, and also not leaving behind, of course, the informal traders as well as our SMMEs who actually make most of our economic drivers in Africa. And I think if there can be collaboration, between the different levels, the national, regional, and the FCFTA level, that can actually make the roles very clear, whose role is what, who plays what role and who plays what role in achieving the same goals of the FCFTA. So I think clearly set roles will be very important if we are to really achieve the overall objective of the FCFTA. I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, let's put our hands together for our panelists. Thanks very, very, very much, everyone. I think a very useful session. Part of the challenge being that services are so heterogeneous. Talking about finance is very different to tourism, to logistics. And I think a lot more detailed work needs to be done. We've already seen that, when the rubber hits the road, it's a different story. So lots of lofty ideals, lofty goals for the AFCAFTA, but I think a lot of work to be done and actually taking advantage of that opportunity. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Justin and Tabelo and Yusuf. That was a great session. Now falls to us. I actually want to first ask Pamela. She might want to make a couple of closing remarks before I'll formally close the meeting.
Thank you so much. I think that that was indeed an interesting discussion, and I sincerely wish to thank everyone present as well as those that have intervened online. I think that the more we take these engaging topics to the table, the more open our exchanges are, and the more we can realize some of these goals. I was just wanting to say that when the discussions were taking place now in the last session, I was thinking about the comment that Tabelo made about the roads and the condition of our roads. In Africa, I think we only have an average of about 204 kilometers compared to 944 kilometers per 1,000 square meters that is actually, physical roads. But of that in Africa, only 1/3 is actually paved. And we know that some of these infrastructures can be alluded to just one single country, that is South Africa. But also there, the roads, need to be maintained seriously. Going into the African, Continental Free Trade Secretariat in 2018, at least 23 countries signed the Single African Air Market Agreement. And I think that discussions there was, to liberate our continent in terms of open skies. But we know that that has been also slow, and it is important to, for the Secretariat to take these discussions forward as they work with the banks, they work with, key private sector stakeholders, etc. So overall, I think this was indeed an interesting discussion for both SAIA, the African Union Development Agency, to work with think tanks and to demonstrate the amount of knowledge and wealth that we can contribute to some of these discussions. So thank you, and we look forward to having more discussions in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That's really great. I think I'm not going to be long. I just want to say I think it's been incredibly rich and very, very informative. I think one of the key takeaways for me is the question around role clarification. When we consider an ambitious project like the AFCFTA, I think we need to consider it in the framework of a very intricate lattice work of regulatory reform, considering political will, which is absolutely essential to make sure that we actually do move to the implementation phase. But then also the big role of consultation. And consultation doesn't mean necessarily just pitching up for a meeting or a once-off dialogue. It actually requires ongoing engagement, a very clear sense of a joint vision, and very clear set of objectives in terms of how do we actually get to the point where we make it easier for ourselves to flourish in our region. I thought the question that was asked about consumption behavior is really interesting, because it's anecdotally what we've seen is that households in our region are willing to save for a very, very long time to buy a really expensive product. It comes back to the point that Tabelo made around standards. So your default position as a private consumer is actually to hold out for a really good product.
Yeah.
But it does also raise the question, because what does that mean in terms of building a thriving market in our region? Because the other option that often faces consumers in our region is to really just go for the cheapest possible option. And we have lots of cheap possible options. But the concern around that is that's really, these products are not produced in our region. I really like the point that you made, Tabelo, that it's not a question of sort of trying to follow a very traditional approach. We're going to manufacture our products before we get to really exploiting our services potential. I think we find ourselves in an extremely volatile, difficult, challenging environment. I think the points made around investment in R&D and innovation is incredibly important for our region, and we should really invest in human capital in our region. And then the big question around finance. So there's a huge discussion that's happening at the global level around MDB reform to ensure that multilateral development banks and international financial institutions serve their constituents better. I think this is a discussion that we have a real stake in as a region, and we need to be part of those discussions. So let me just end by saying this is certainly the AfCFTA, the point was made. It's not a single once-off event. It really is a process, and it requires a lot of collaborative work to make it happen. And I hope this was one step in that process. So thank you very much to our great audience and our fantastic speakers and our moderators. We really appreciate the time. And then lastly, thank you to Auda Nepat and to our keynote speaker, Dr. Sacker. We appreciate your insights, and we appreciate the collaboration. Thank you very much. Until we speak again.